that we may see a stock market crash, and we're already seeing sure signs of recession. So my expectation is by, pardon me, by mid-October, the economy will be, it's already in bad shape, but it'll be apparent to voters in ways, it already is, but it'll be more apparent to voters. Unemployment's going up. People are losing their jobs. People are worried about their jobs. First one is Ukraine. We talked about Ukraine. Um, Russia is rolling up victories much faster and of more significance than Americans realize. I don't expect Americans to be able to, recite the names of 15 Ukrainian villages, but you people do read the headline, the New York Times or the Washington Post or NBC News or whatever, Fox. Um, and it's not being reported because there's been a continual propaganda campaign to say, Ukraine's using the wonder weapons. They got F-16s, by the way. The F-16s are being shot down. And then she went through that. She said, well, we gave them the Bradley fighting vehicles, Abrams tanks, Stinger missiles. We did, and they all failed. The Bradley tanks are burning on the battlefield. The Bradley fighting vehicles are burning on the battlefield. The Abrams tanks are burning on the battlefield. The F-16s are being shot down. The HIMARS precision guided artillery is hitting empty cornfields because the Russians figured out how to jam the GPS. So none of those weapons are working, which should disturb NATO. Forget about Ukraine. But Russia is taking. You hear these names like, are they taking Kiev now? They may not have to, but these towns you've never heard of that are major logistics hubs. You got to study the battle space. Look at the railroad lines, the major highways, the rivers, etc. And there are certain towns or large towns, small cities, whatever you want to call them, that are key hubs. Russia is taking those. Once you do, meaning the Ukrainian armed forces, cannot resupply these other outposts, these other fortresses, because you've taken the transportation hub. There's no way to get there. And so that's going on. The Kursk invasion of, hey, Ukraine invaded Russia. Well, again, you got to know the geography. The part of Russia that they invaded, and they did, they took some territory. It's forests and dirt roads. I mean, they didn't get anything of significance. They didn't get anywhere near the Kursk nuclear power plant, which was the original objective. That failed. They've now been surrounded, and they're going to be annihilated. They're going to have two choices: surrender or die. But the Russians aren't there yet. But what I just described, Matt, is going to by October 1st, mark it down. That's going to be the beginning of a major offensive, really the annihilation of the troops in Kursk in Russia, which are, by the way, their best reserves. When those troops surrender or are killed, Ukraine will have no reserves. And then on the battlefront in Donbass itself, moving towards the Dnieper River, Russia is rolling up Vuhledar and other key logistics hubs, and there are going to be major advances, and the ability of Ukraine to hold out is going to be, will evaporate basically, and it'll be very, very clear. The other one, we have a little friend called the economy, and sorry, Federal Reserve, sorry, White House. The economy is bigger than all those things. The Fed is basically kind of a puppet show. I mean, they come out, now they're cutting rates. They're going to cut rates September 18th. We've already told our readers about that. Everyone thinks it's stimulus. It's not stimulus. When the Fed is cutting rates, what they're saying is we're in a recession. I mean, the lowest prolonged rates in U.S. history were during the Great Depression. Low rates are associated with very weak economic growth, deflation, disinflation, and recession. In a prosperous economy where things are growing, interest rates actually go up because they're competing for funds. People say, hey, I want to borrow some money, want to issue some bonds because I want to build a new factory, I want to hire people, et cetera. So rates actually go up, not sky high, but 5, 6, 7%, because people are borrowing the money and banks are freely lending to expand the economy. When rates come down, now, by the way, the Fed's behind the curve. Short-term interest rates are collapsing on their own, just in the market. Forget the Fed. Now, so the Fed's going to cut rates on September 18th, probably cut them again in November. There are no more Fed meetings between September 18th and the election. So whatever they do September 18th, that's it until after the election. But they'll probably cut again in November and December. But they're chasing the market down. The Fed's not leading the economy. The Fed's chasing the economy. in a very bad way. Gasoline prices are coming down. You're like, hey, isn't that a big victory for Kamala Harris? No, because they're coming down because we're going into a recession. If they were coming down because they were pumping more or had fixed the supply chain or stopped government spending or done something constructive, that's one thing. But that's not what's happening. Prices are collapsing because demand is collapsing. It has nothing, well, very little to do with supply, everything to do with demand. And it's another sign of recession. So I don't want to turn this into an economics lecture, except to say, so between Russia rolling over Ukraine and the economy collapsing in front of our eyes, those are things that are happening now that are going to be more apparent by October, bigger than, we'll be talking about the debate a couple of weeks from now. They'll be talking about the unemployment rate. Well, great question, Madeline. Okay, let's look at her platform. She doesn't have much of a platform. They just actually put something on the website like 2 days ago, and some tech maven. You can go into, you can get what's called metadata, which is actually you can kind of look behind the curtain of whatever they posted, and they found out it was cut and pasted from Biden's platform. So, they literally took the Biden platform, you cut and pasted into her website, and that's her platform. So some tech admin or whatever didn't know what he or she was doing because that was pretty easy to figure out. So, so no substance at all. But let's look at what she said. Like, she has come out with a few positions. She wants to increase corporate income taxes. She wants to increase capital gains taxes. She wants to raise tax rates. By the way, she says we're not going to raise rates on anyone making less than $400,000. Which, yeah, it's a lot of money, but I'm sorry, if you live in New York City and marry a couple and 400,000, yeah, okay, you're not on the street, but it's not quite as much as it sounds. The rest of the country, yeah. Well, by the way, what I said is in certain pockets of the country. I'm not saying it's not a lot of money. I'm saying it's not as much as you might think if you live in one of these very expensive East or West Coast cities. But here's the thing: they're taking a married couple who make 200,000 each, and they combine them, and then that's 400,000. They're going to get whacked. Those individuals say, "Hey, I make $200,000." Yeah, but if you file a joint return and they're combining them, so when they say they're not raising taxes on anyone making less than 400, it's actually less than 200 if you happen to be married and filing a joint return. So that's a much lower threshold than they've admitted. But just take what, and then we're going to pursue price gouging. I guess say supermarkets work on a 1% margin. Okay, let's go after Walmart and other Whole Foods and other Trader Joe's and other departments, grocery store chains, and let's whack the heck out of them. You know what you get when you put on price controls? Because we know, because we've seen this for 100 years. You get shortages, you get empty shelves right away, you get lines, and you get a black market. People are like, okay, well, I can't sell at a fair price in a normal venue, so find me on eBay or find me at a flea market, find me somewhere, but I'm going to basically work outside the system. So you get if you actually want certain things, you'll have to go to a black market, or if you go to the store, the shelves will be partly empty because nobody wants to sell stuff at a loss. Nobody wants to lose money. So it's kind of like East Germany in the 1950s. People get up at 6 a.m. and line up and hope to get a loaf of bread by 5 o'clock at night. That's how they spend their day, in line trying to get one loaf of bread. That's an extreme example, but it's not an uncommon example. And it is what happens when you start putting on price controls. Nixon put on price controls in 1971, but look where we were by the late. Then that led right into a very bad recession, 1974, the worst since World War II, or sorry, since the Great Depression at the time. And then look where we ended up in the late 70s, where the dollar lost 50% of its value in 5 years. So thanks, Kamala. But if I were a stock market investor, I'd sell ahead of her election or ahead of her administration, because why not? If you can get 20% capital gains instead of 25%, if you can get, again, 22% corporate taxes instead of 28%, I think that's the level she wants to go. That's very bad for stocks, very bad for corporate earnings. Lower corporate earnings are bad for stocks. So you're going to see the stock market turn on a dime and say, hey, I'm getting out of here before she becomes president. So you could be looking at shortages of goods, black markets, higher taxes, and lower stock prices. That's the Kamala plan. She doesn't say that. She says we're going to raise all these taxes. Well, I've spent the first 10 years of my career as international tax counsel to Citibank. I have a graduate law degree in taxation. I know a little bit about it. And I can tell you what's going to happen, which is stock prices are going to go down. So yeah, I'd be very concerned about that. And I think the market will figure that out. Maybe they are already. Let's look at, to the extent, by the way, today, to the extent that she got a bump from the debate, and I think she did, at least in the minds of observers, you're going to see stock prices go down now because, like, hey, she's going to ask the same. Investors are going to ask the same question you asked, Matt, which is, what if she wins? The answer is it's terrible for stocks. And on your other point on the meltdown, that's not far fetched. That's happening. So now, different question. So Trump wins. Okay, that's so Trump wins on November 5th when they count the votes, even though they're voting now. Gets whatever 260 or maybe as high as 300 electoral votes. You have to go to January 6, 2025. Everyone's talking about January 6, 2020. Let's go ahead to January 6, 2025. Same scenario. You're in Capitol Hill. The House and the Senate convene. They got to count the electoral votes. Now, on November 5th, we're also going to vote for members of Congress for the House of Representatives. So whoever counts the votes on January 6th, 2025, is not the existing House. It's the new House. Whoever wins on November 5th, they get sworn in on January 3rd, and then on January 6th, they count the votes. Now, there's a good chance, it's hard to put a stake in the ground, there are 435 seats, but there's a good chance that the Democrats could take the House, even if Trump wins the White House and the Republicans take over the Senate, which I do expect. The Democrats could take the House. So you get to January 6th, that's the new Democratic-controlled House. They're going to introduce a resolution saying that Trump is an insurrectionist because of January 6th, 2020. They've already written it. Jimmy Raskin, the Democratic congressman from Maryland, de facto communist, he's already written it. He's already talked about this. This isn't like, I didn't like break into a safe and steal this. This is kind of out there. So what happens then? If the House adopts that resolution, and if they're Democratic controlled, they will, then Trump's electoral votes are disqualified. He got them. He won, let's say 300, only need to get 270, but he'll be disqualified under the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. By the way, people say, didn't the Supreme Court say that doesn't apply? No, the Supreme Court said a state cannot do it. Colorado and Maine were trying to kick Trump off the ballot as an insurrectionist. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. States don't have that power. But they also, and I read the opinion, but they also said, but the Congress could, because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, I think you have to go down to Section 4, says, by the way, the Congress can write laws to implement Section 3, and the resolution would be in that category. So now you throw out Trump's electoral votes. What happens then? Well, Kamala Harris doesn't have 270 in this scenario because Trump got more than 270. So the most she could have is, 220, 230, whatever. She doesn't win because she doesn't have 270. Trump doesn't win because he was disqualified. So what happens next? The answer, this is all the 12th Amendment, by the way, which was passed in 1804. The 12th Amendment says that election goes to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives does not vote by individual. They vote by state delegations. So Texas gets one vote, California gets one vote, New Jersey gets one vote. It doesn't matter how many members you have in the delegation or what the population of your state is. Each state gets one vote. You could have the case, probably will be the case, where the Democrats control the majority of the individual votes, but the Republicans control the majority of the state delegations. But you can't vote for Trump because he's disqualified under the insurrection clause. You can't vote for anybody who didn't win a state because the Constitution says take the next three electoral vote getters and you can choose among those three. Well, in what I'm describing, there's only one because RFK, assuming no one else wins a state, RFK Jr., Jill Stein, Cornel West, none of them are going to win a state. So if you disqualify Trump and you say, well, who's left? The answer is Kamala Harris. She's the only one that they can vote for, regardless of who you are. So she becomes the president in that scenario. But J.D. Vance, who is not disqualified, becomes the vice president. So one outcome is you could have a situation where Kamala Harris is the president, J.D. Vance is the vice president. And that has happened before. 1800, Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, they hated each other, two different parties, but one was president, one was vice president. So you could have a Harris, J.D. Vance administration. Now I'm going to take it one step further, Matt, because I am a lawyer. I did take constitutional law, I had a good professor, and I read the 12th Amendment carefully. Everything I just described only applies if there's a quorum. So now let's take it a step further. The Republican state delegations in the United States House of Representatives pitch a tent and leave the House floor, and they don't have a quorum. What happens now? The 12th Amendment says the vice president becomes the acting president until you guys figure it out. So J.D. Vance could be president.
Well, to say that there's plenty of things to keep an eye on. Yeah, we've got, I mean, just in between now and the election, you said it. We've got Ukraine, we've got the economy. We're going to keep an eye on that. Then we've got the election itself, which could take a few days to count the votes and all these different things. Plus your meltdown theory where, you know, if they disqualify Trump, we could see some big time sparks fly.
Yeah,
So
I'll give you one more quickly, which
all
is
right, do it.
If Trump wins on November 5th, the meltdown scenario is January 6th. But what happens on November 6th, the day after the election? You're going to see riots from coast to coast. The Antifa, BLM, goon squads are already mobilizing.